call this number.
Warning, the following show contains conservative posturing, radical Christian ideas, and may offend pagans, Wiccans, Islamic fundamentalists, and other unenlightened individuals. Callers and guests may be subjected to brash and offensive comments by the hosts and any other type of bullying tactics available. But that's okay. We know why you're here.
This concludes this test of the emergency broadcast system.
Tonight is March 22nd, 2009.
What's up?
Howdy.
Welcome to Woe 2. What's up with you?
Nothing much. I just got here.
Yeah, I noticed. Out of breath, running.
Yeah,
I heard the car pull up. I was like, yeah, he's here.
I'm all right.
Tonight, welcome to World of the Unexplained. For those of you newly tuning in listeners, you can catch our site and some of our old podcasts. And when I say old, I mean really old. worldoftheunexplained.com. We're going to be updating those one day. But anyway, tonight we've got a surprise for you. We have an older interview posted by the same person. Oliver Williams is with us tonight, and he's going to speak about John Titor, the time traveler. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with this story, we're going to start out by letting Mr. Williams kind of give us a background on it. So those of you unfamiliar that thinks that time travel is not real, well, scoff not. Without further ado, Mr. Oliver Williams, how are you tonight, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks, guys.
Give our listeners a background. Who's this John Titor guy, and how does he say he travels through time?
Sure. The story of John Titor, actually, I believe now, started way back in 1998, which is almost 10 years ago. And somebody with that name got a hold of the old Art Bell show and sent 2 faxes to Art when he had an open time traveler line. And Art read them on the air. It was about two years later, in November of 2000, that this same person came up again under the name of John Titor. And basically what they did is they went online into a couple of forums, claimed they were a time traveler, and started answering questions about what the future looked like, how the time machine worked, history, all sorts of things. And at the time, nobody really paid too much attention to it. He left in March of 2001, and then he was gone. From there on, people started paying more attention to what he had posted because they thought some of what he was saying was starting to come true. And that was about the time that I got involved. A friend of mine pointed me to the post. This is in 2002, and I started reading them, and like everybody else, as soon as I found them, I stayed up all night. I read them straight through. And I became so fascinated with it that I started looking around on the internet where all these posts were, and they were scattered all over the place. So all I did was take all the posts, I edited them down and put them on one website, and I started getting a flood of people coming to the site to read the posts. So then we started adding some news. We had some links where people could come in and email me if they saw something that they thought I should pay attention to. And it just sort of grown from there, and that's how JohnTitor.com came about. So basically, that's the synopsis of who John Titor is.
Now, what did he say that the future was going to look like?
One of the first things John said when he got here was he talked in detail about how his time machine worked. So for a while, he talked about the actual physics. He talked about how his time machine was built. And according to John, the time machine operates by using 2 mini black holes that generate the power and the gravity to let you travel through time. And the thing that he said, almost in his first set of posts, was that the technology that would allow this to happen would be announced later that year in the fall. And this is in the year 2001. And then, of course, he left in March, and it was September of 2001, where CERN came forward and said that they indeed expected to be able to create mini black holes with their new collider, which we're waiting for right now. So that was the first thing that he said about the future. Other than that, John said that for him, well, let me back up a second. John spent a lot of time talking about how time travel worked, and a lot of people right now might be familiar with the idea of multiple realities, which means you're really not traveling on the same time that you exist on. You're going to another reality that looks exactly like the one that you left. So that gets around the grandfather paradox. In other words, if you travel in time, go back in the past, kill your grandfather, it doesn't affect where you came from. It only affects where you are.
I see.
So according to John, he said that his future, Y2K happened. He said that there was a civil war in his future in the United States. He said there was a nuclear war that encompassed the whole world in 2015. And then he said that time travel was invented around 2034, and it was in 2036 when he left to go on the military mission, which brought him to our time.
Now, didn't he come back to our time to get something from an old computer?
He did. He claimed that his mission was to go back to 1975 and get a computer that IBM had manufactured and released that year called the 5100. He said that the 5100 had properties that were not advertised by IBM, which made it a significant piece of technology for them to have in the future. What he said was the 5100 was portable and allowed you to communicate with the huge IBM mainframes through this terminal, but IBM did not advertise that because a big part of their business at the time was servicing these huge computers. So they didn't want their customers knowing that they could buy this computer and do it themselves. Now, when he said that, of course, I think nobody really understood what he was saying, and it wasn't until about a year or two later, this is right after I got involved, where a couple of IBM engineers heard about the story, and they actually came forward and said, he's telling the truth, that there was maybe 20 people on the planet that knew about what he described, and either he knew about it or the guy's telling the truth.
Huh. That's kind of creepy, isn't it?
A little bit.
Yeah, it's one of those major signposts that make you have to take a second look at it every time and go, exactly what's going on here. So I agree with you.
No, I know that we'd talked before when you've been a guest on our show that at one point in time in the future there's supposed to be 5 presidents of the United States, and we're all kind of divided up. Did any of his predictions focus on having the first African American president or anything like that?
He did make a reference to the president now comparing themselves to Lincoln.
Huh.
So a lot of people are pointing to that, suggesting that maybe that's significant in some way. But his only comments about the president now were that they would compare themselves to Lincoln, and they would do everything they could to try to hold the country together, but they would be ultimately unsuccessful in doing that.
Great. Good news, as always, from this.
He said they're trying,
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Well, I want to talk about some of the newer things real quick, and we can go back and we can take calls. We'll open the lines up. 877-722-7382. That's toll free anywhere in the United States and Canada. 877-722-7382. That's also 1-877-SCARE, the letter U, the number 2, SCARE you 2. Now, you said March 10th, Stephen Hawking had something to say.
Yeah, and actually, I just found this today, and this is a good example of why I keep coming back to it. To give you a little background, John talked in detail about how his time machine worked and the physics, and the people at the time were giving him a lot of flack because they were saying he was wrong. Stephen Hawking didn't believe that, and John said, no, Stephen Hawking is going to change his view on this. Well, a while ago, it turns out Stephen Hawking did change his view about black holes, and on March 10th, he gave a speech where he talked about it further. And the thing that's interesting is everything that Stephen said about how time travel works or how he expects it to work are pretty much point by point exactly how John described it would work. For example, he said that when you travel in time, it's a one-way trip. You can never get back to the exact place you left. And as far as I know, that was a new idea in science. Nobody was even talking about that. In fact, the idea of multiple realities back then was still in science fiction. Now you have real scientists like Stephen Hawking, Ronald Mallet, another scientist named John Kramer, that are all saying that when time travel happens, that's exactly the way it works. Hawking has also said that the black hole has to be spinning, that you can make a trip through it and come out of it and end up in a multiple reality. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but all of these ideas that are now in mainstream science were first proposed by John Titor 10 years ago.
Huh.
A couple other things that are happening, which are kind of interesting. John was asked about phone service. It was one of the obscure questions he got 10 years ago. And he said that we do have a phone service, but it's completely through the Internet now. There are no phone companies. And that may not seem significant, but if you think 10 years ago, there was no Vonage.
Yeah,
there was no
voice over IP.
Super Jack. There was no Verizon. And I just saw recently Google is about to announce a new service whereby they're going to allow free phone service over the Internet to anybody who wants it. And, I think when that happens, I think that if you want to call it prediction, will be fulfilled. He also talked a great deal about mad cow disease, and I just saw an article that they now have 5 dead people in Spain within the last month who have died from dead cow. In addition, there's another thing going on, and anybody right now on a computer can go take a look at this. There's a guy who calls himself Rasmus, who is a self-proclaimed hoax hunter, and he has a YouTube channel and a blog. And he claims to have evidence that this is all a hoax.
Sure.
So for about a period of a month, he was reporting about all the evidence that he had. And actually, when you first took a look at it, his methods were kind of interesting. But what he claims now is that he has evidence that John Titor is not real, that he's fake, and he's posted on his site. And basically, he says he found a P.O. box in Kissimmee, Florida, where he believes somebody has set up a John Titor's name and that whoever signed for that P.O. box is actually responsible for the whole story. And if you go in the site, if you go to his YouTube channel, take a look at it, you can see all the people that have responded to it. And the last interesting thing I saw, there's a company, I think it's a film company, I think their name, let me look at my notes, it's called Eyes Views Production, and they've offered to go and track down this P.O. box and this person. So everybody's kind of waiting now to see what happens with that.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where we are right now.
That is very interesting.
It's an interesting name,
Now,
Rasmus.
Oliver, if we find out it's you, we're going to be a little upset. But well, tell us what did John say the limitations were as far as time travel was concerned?
Well, the way he described it from where he came was that right now the military was using time travel to solve certain problems in the future, and that's why he was sent out. And he said that there were multiple versions of the time machine that he had, but the one that he was using allowed him to go, I think he said a maximum of 60 years forward or backward. He said if you tried to go more than that, the machine would go to a different reality that looked much different from the one that you left. So there was what would you call it? I guess you would call it amount of certainty, which he said was measured as divergence. For example, if you traveled around in time and went back 10 years, there would be maybe a 2 or 3% divergence, as he described it, and that would be how different that reality was from the one that you left. So in terms of the limits of time travel, somebody asked him, could you go back 2,000 years and witness the birth of Christ? And he said, no, I couldn't, because if I tried to do that, I would end up on a reality that was so different that he might not even have been born. So that was kind of an answer to a question that stunned a few people.
No, as far as why didn't he just go back, and stay? Why didn't he stay in our world in 1990, whenever?
Well, according to him, his mission was to get this computer and then bring it back to the future. So he had to go back to 1975 and then go back to 2036, but apparently he had some interaction in 1975 that caused him to stop in the year 1998 and then 2000 and go back. So nobody's too sure about exactly why he did that, but that's what he claimed in the posts.
What about now? You say there's also some talk of a civil war possibility. What?
Yeah, this is actually one of the things that's talked about the most with John Titor. It's also his biggest criticism, because John said in his posts, and he said it in a couple different ways. He said a civil war was going to start in the United States in the year 2004 and 2005.
Oops.
And then he said by 2008, it was going to be obvious to everybody about what was going on. And a lot of people point to that and they say, well, since there's no civil war, then he obviously was a fraud. However, if you look closely at what he's saying, he's talking about his reality, if you will. He's not talking about ours. So I guess if you were going to tell a story, that would be a convenient way to get out of that. Or, as a lot of other people have suggested, he may have only been 4 or 5 years off. Maybe he was trying to warn us, but all those things that he was describing are going to start happening right now.
Possibly. I see this thing on your website. It's one of the more interesting things I see on here. A Titor-inspired musical. Tell us a little bit about that. That's
yeah, you know what?
interesting.
These are these things that come out of nowhere, and you know we put that link up there, but there's another one up there too, a website that's doing like a John Titor alternate reality news, and then those guys that put the musical on. And I don't have a whole lot of information about that. I just put that up there because I saw it, but I see stuff like that all the time. I remember, I think it was back in 2004, there was actually a ballet company in Los Angeles that wrote a whole ballet, a dance routine around John Titor, and then performed it in Los Angeles. And I actually did get a chance to see a copy of that, and it's very bizarre to see, you know, the creative takes people seem to have on this.
Yeah, and also sort of the undercurrent of John Titor and affecting all sorts of different people in different ways on, you know, sort of the edge, you know what I mean? Like, I don't really see this John Titor musical really hitting the news or anything, but, you know, here on the net.
Out of mainstream.
Yeah, here on the net and the underground, there's, you know, it seems like he has an effect on a lot of sort of out there sort of people. Yeah.
Well, you know, I think you bring up a good point that, you know, the posts seem to strike people in very different ways. You know, there are people that are just ravenous, crazy to prove that this is false. And then there are the other people. There are the people that are buying the canned goods and the ammunition, the guns, and they're hiding out because they think it's going to happen.
I call those guys my friends. I'm kidding.
Yeah, I mean, but, you know, in between are the people that are motivated to do ballets and musicals and of course, people like me that just found it fascinating and collected all this stuff on the web.
Yeah, exactly. It's something.
Why are you pointing at me? Wait, never mind. Okay, sorry. Dee was pointing at me. I'm like, what? What do you want? Let me go back though. You said that CERN had some new news about black holes.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. Also, CERN back in 2001, as John said, would announce that they expect to be able to make mini black holes in their new collider. Now, from that point forward, scientists were saying, well, even if they did that, they would be so small, they'd be insignificant, they would evaporate, it wouldn't be a problem, don't worry about it. And I think it was about maybe 2 or 3 months ago, I was actually watching Fox News, and I see Michio Kaku on Fox News saying that scientists now are rethinking that they're looking at evidence that maybe these black holes, if they do form at the collider, may not be as harmless as they first thought, and that they were now taking a second look at exactly what they would do if these things happen, which is in stark contrast to what they've been saying for the last 7 years. And it's exactly what John said. So to me, it's significant that these major shifts in science are happening, and nobody is saying anything about that. So that was just one instance that had to do with CERN. That just happened a month ago.
Creepy.
Yeah,
that is creepy. It really is.
Well, the whole notion of black holes, you know, you think of them as the most horrific cosmic anomaly in the universe, and here you are using them as a tool, creating...
Yeah, well, you know, to even go one scale up on creepy, John, in fact, go back in the post, look it up yourself. John actually said a black hole with about the mass of a mountain, and then he goes on to describe the properties of that. And I'm looking at the news story today, and that's exactly what they're saying in the news story. They say a black hole about the size of a mountain would have these properties, which is exactly what he said 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I mean, even if he was an inside guy working at this place, I mean, being able to say, hey, in 10 years we're going to announce this, in 10 years we're going to announce that, I mean, that would still be a little hard to predict. Yeah,
and overlap that with the only 20 people on the planet that knew about the IBM computer.
Sure. That's true. And, you know, that brings to mind something about, I don't know if it's really related or not, but what they're talking about, the space shuttle, and there are a number of components for the space shuttle that they don't make anymore, because space shuttles came out in the early 80s, and all of a sudden, their technology, even though they repair them and everything, the fundamental wet work of it is based on technology from way back in the day, and they're looking for, the NASA's looking for people. Hey, do you have components to this part or that other part? Because of I don't know, just when it was built. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, we had a story like that came up a while ago, and what I had heard was that NASA was actually going to eBay looking for old computers just for that reason, because the systems on the shuttle are so old. So, to me, that answers the criticism. Well, if you had a time machine, why the heck would you want to go back to 1975 to get an old piece of computer hardware, when, in fact, we're doing it right now with the space shuttle?
That's awful. That's
exactly,
awful.
And I think that was the story, and they went on eBay and were looking for old computers.
NASA wants to buy your old Commodore 64.
I think I need to talk to my dad about the VIC-20.
The VIC-20, yeah.
He has. He might need to talk to NASA.
Something else that's interesting. Ever since, when I first started following this, you could go to eBay and you could find IBM 5100s on eBay. They wouldn't be working, but at least you could find them. Now, if you try to do that, you cannot find one to save your life. And I've seen some, old computer repair shops and, computer museums online, and they say that the 5100s are just gone. I said, even if you can find one, you're going to pay like 3 or 4 times the price that IBM was asking for them in 1975.
That's pretty good.
So I kind of find it interesting that all of a sudden all the 5100s are gone.
It makes you wonder if somebody on the who's keeping up with this stuff is like
buying them all to corner the market later.
Maybe.
You got it? You got to buy it from me.
Yeah, exactly.
I did see one guy who said, if you find one, hang on to it, because time travelers in the future are going to need them. So.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
Well, you might as well, right? It's not like it's going to be necessarily compatible with anything we have now,
That's true.
You can't exactly use them for much.
But I want to get into some of the dark and scary things, the predictions accomplished when we return from our break. That's what I want to talk about. But our number here is toll-free in the U.S. and Canada, 877-722-7382. That number is 877-722-7382 or 1-877-SCARE-U2. And you can call us up tonight at World of the Unexplained and speak with Mr. Oliver Williams about this craziness that we call the time traveler John Titor. And, John, if you're out there listening tonight, feel free to pick up the phone and dial in. That'd make some radio history, I think.
From the future.
Exactly. But I do want to talk about some of the things to kind of whet our appetite a little bit. What kind of, besides the nuclear war, what other kinds of things did he predict?
Okay.
Well, no, I'm asking.
Oh, I got you. I'm sorry. Geez, I got a whole list here. He talked about CERN. He talked about IBM. A lot of people feel he predicted 9/11 in 98. He talked about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. He talked about our Constitution being eroded. He talked about China putting a man in space. He talked about our space shuttles having problems. Mad cow, Stephen Hawking, virus cells to fight cancer. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So you can talk about all that stuff.
Excellent. We'll get to it when we come back from the break.
Definitely. You're listening to World of the Unexplained. Tonight, our guest once again is Oliver Williams. Give us a call. We're going to take our short break, and we'll be back in a little bit. You're listening to World of the Unexplained on KFNX. We'll be back after this.
And we're back. World of the Unexplained. Give us a call. We got the lines open. 1-877-722-7382 or 1-877-SCARE-U2, the letter U, the number 2, like scaring the band.
Scaring the band, U2.
Or scaring yourself. We got Oliver Williams on tonight talking about a little time traveler by the name of John Titor.
John, if you're listening, feel free to call.
By all means. Oliver, let's talk about the very thrilling and upbeat topic of nuclear war.
Sure. John started off talking about his future and saying that Y2K did happen for him in his reality. Didn't happen for us, happened for him. He said that event is what basically got the ball rolling for all the events that led up to a nuclear war. He said that a civil war in the United States started. And
was it the South again? Please tell me it wasn't the South again.
Did we start it?
No.
Okay, good.
Okay. Actually, John's distinction about the Civil War the only thing he says for sure is that he says that there's a conflict between people in the city and people who don't live in cities. And he said that before the war started, it would be absolutely obvious that it was unsafe to be in cities. And he said that this conflict, that raged in the United States took a while to develop, but it caused instability in Western, it caused instability in the West, which gave Russia and all of our other enemies the opportunity to attack us. He said that there wasn't a new war in the Middle East that basically came about because Israel was going to be isolated, and they would be put on the defensive, and they would be attacked. And the way John describes it is that when Russia launches nuclear weapons against the United States, that they are attacking John's enemy, if that makes any sense. In other words, if you want to go back to the old Civil War, you had the North and the South, but France was helping the South. So from John's point of view, Russia was like France during the Civil War, in that who they attacked helped John and helped his side win. So he talked about that in great detail. He said he had memories of, when he was a kid. I think he said he was like 13 years old when the bombs started falling, and he talked about that. He talked about the distribution of air burst versus ground burst. He said most of the targets were cities, and that the large universities were still left standing, and those became the new hubs for, culture and learning. In fact, he said that he trained at the University of Florida in Gainesville because he said that's where the libraries were. Those were the only places you could go to find books. So he went into a lot of detail about exactly how this war affected, American culture. For example, you mentioned the presidents. He said that the United States divided into 5 parts. And if you look in the news, you will find that apparently there was a Russian sociologist and a group of people that were suggesting that that's exactly what's going to happen in the United States. He said each one of those areas had their own president, and the job of president became sort of a union of these 5 people. And instead of having one person in that role, I guess they voted on a term basis. So you'd always have 1 or 2 people that were in there, and then they would overlap so that there was no discontinuous policy as far as the president went. They said that's the big change that they made there. He also said that politics was more on a local level, that the counties and the states became much stronger than the federal government. He talked about how communities changed, how they came together and they grew their own food, how, a lot of what he talked about may have seemed very socialist or communistic, but he talked about the fact that, after the war, these are things that they had to do just to survive. He talked about civil rights. He talked about what people wore. He talked about hairstyles. I mean, he just went on and on and on.
Wow. Did the United States launch nuclear weapons in retaliation, or were we too far divided at this point?
Oh, no. According to John, we did respond. So we were part of that conflict. We hit Russia. They hit us. China, he said, overtakes Korea and Japan and attacks Australia. Europe was also affected by this war. They were also hit. So yeah, it was a large world war that apparently, didn't last very long. He also describes in the Civil War in the United States before the nuclear war that he was a soldier, fighting with militia. So he talked about, in fact, I'll tell you something else. This is kind of interesting. I forgot about this. While John was posting, he said there was a poem that sort of became that all the soldiers knew in his time at the Civil War. And he actually went on and he recited a few lines from the poem. And he said that the poem had changed a little bit, but basically this is the whole thing. He actually gave the name of the poem. It was called A Soldier's Winter. And he said it was written by a soldier in the war who had died, and it just sort of got passed around between all the other soldiers. Well, about, I think it was 2 years ago, 2007, it turns out a colonel in the Army actually wrote that poem and published it. And you can find it online, and it's called A Soldier's Winter. And if you look at it, a lot of the lines are very similar to the lines that John recited when he was here.
Oh, my gosh.
So a lot of people are pointing to that, saying, there's the guy. He just wrote the poem John talked about, 10 years ago. So that was another interesting thing that happened that I'd forgotten about.
Do you think that John Titor is real?
You know what? You have to ask me that on any given day.
Okay.
Because I will go 3 months, and I'll say, you know what? It was a smart guy. It was a group of smart people. This can't be real. And then I'll see something in the news, and then I'll go back the other way. I'll say, wow, it just, that creepy feeling that you get when you've been following this, and you see stuff like this start to happen, or you see stuff like this in the news, and it just gives you that weird feeling that you just can't totally discount this. I've seen somebody point out, I thought this was kind of interesting, they said, John Titor could be a time traveler and a liar. So, you're not really going to know anyway.
That's true.
That's a good point, because maybe he is a time traveler, but he doesn't want to exactly give away what's going on, possibly. I mean, maybe he's reconstructing a potential reality to kind of scare us to do something when it's not really that way in his time. But you're right. How are we going to know, honestly?
Well, the other thing, too, is that after being close to this for so long, and this is my only theory, if this is all real, and on some days I feel that way, I get the sense that he's trying to say something that's not obvious in the post. I have no idea what it is. I have no idea why it's there. I just get this feeling that he's trying to say something that's not obvious. And I don't know how else to better define it than that.
That's interesting. Like a cryptic, I don't know. Yeah,
the decoder ring.
You gotta have the decoder ring from the future. Maybe that's what the 5100.
If you have any questions for Oliver Williams, you can give us a call here. Excuse me, I've got this frog in my throat or something. You can give us a call here tonight at 877-722-7382. That's 877-SCARE-U2. Toll free in the U.S. and Canada. And just call in and we'll put you right in. And Oliver will answer your questions if he knows the answer, and we'll go from there.
What does the federal government think about this? I mean, are you getting? I mean, I'm just curious. I mean, are you getting, black cars pulling up in outside your house and
don't laugh about that, because I have to believe this is on their radar somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure.
And my example is that we've got the site, and you can go back and see where all the hits are coming from. Which countries they're coming from and where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
We get a lot of hits from the federal government. We can tell they're coming from, I don't know if we can tell if they're coming from NSA or CIA servers, but I know where they're coming from, Department of Defense. And what I tell myself is, they're not looking at me, they're just looking at this, the way I look at it. It's got to be something that's good to look at and read, and, I don't want to believe that they're interested in me and that there's going to be black cars driving by my house, so I try not to think about that.
Yeah, it's probably better that way.
Oh my gosh, it's insane. But yeah, I mean, you do wonder about stuff like that. If there is anything with all it's just a little too coincidental in some certain circumstances that it makes you go, huh, and just think about it. Now you had mentioned that after the nuclear war, this is when he decides, after his side wins or whatever, to travel back in time for this equipment, correct?
Right, correct.
And that's the equipment is used to help how? I mean, other than to...
Right, what he says is that they have a lot of IBM, these huge IBM mainframe systems, or they have these huge computer systems that, that are modern by our standards, but by the time they get to 2036, they are built on the basis of these old IBM systems. And I guess they don't work, or they need to get information from them or something. But this computer was a solution to do that. In other words, they need to hook the 5100 up to these huge mainframes, communicate with them, get them running again, something along those lines. But as was pointed out, this is like 4 or 5 years ago. That's not far-fetched. I mean, a lot of for example, the ATM and the credit card systems that our transactions are on, their underpinnings are still on very old IBM mainframe systems. So, it's not a ridiculous idea that might be true.
Now, do any of his predictions involve Islam or anything like that as far as the war with?
He's not specific. He talks about, Israel's conflict with their neighbors. And he also, and I agree with this now. I didn't at first. In the first Art Bell fax back in 1998, he makes an obvious reference to buildings that are no longer in New York City. He said there's a skyscraper that's missing in New York City from the time that I'm from. And he says that in 1998. So a lot of people have pointed that, saying that he was trying to reference 9/11.
Oh, that's eerie.
Yeah, it is.
What about, now you said, excuse me, obviously Gainesville, Florida is unaffected. What parts of this country are affected by the nuclear?
Well, the impression, this is the impression I get from reading the Post, is that Russia was not so much interested in wiping out the United States or killing people as much as they were taking care of whatever was wrong inside of cities. So they were, yes, killing people, but they weren't nuking the countryside. They weren't taking out smaller towns. They were only going after large targets inside the United States. And I believe, according to John, I think he said they used airburst weapons, which meant that the radiation would not be as bad versus using ground-burst weapons. And he said that they did that on purpose, that they didn't want radiation to be covering the land for thousands of years. Their goal was to destroy the cities.
That's really interesting.
I believe those are pretty much the details he gave about the war.
Yeah, that does stand to make you wonder. If their actions weren't exactly designed to kill people, then but instead to eradicate cities, then it gives you the implication that maybe there was something else in the cities, or something that was being developed in the cities. Maybe a new technology, maybe some kind of crazy science experiment gone horribly wrong. Who knows, really? But it would
maybe the welfare state.
Oh my gosh!
I'm serious. I'm getting to that. All the social programs,
dangerous poor people
that Obama's. Maybe they got a little envious of all those rich people living out, in the burbs, and wanted to come kill everybody. I don't know.
Well, in thinking about it now, I know one of the significant things that John talked about was that there was a division between people who lived in the cities and people who lived not in cities, because the people that did not live in the cities had to support the people that lived in the city. In other words, that was where the food was coming from. That was where the water was coming from. So that there was some sort of division on that level that drove the Civil War. And I think that might have been a key issue as to why they were attacked.
You would think they're going to lose anyway in the cities because, they don't have the guns and stuff there. Like, you get out in the suburbs, you got the guys with the guns and they can grow their own food and all kinds of stuff like that if need be. I mean, it's just more of a...
That's true, but I mean, there's lots of other things in cities too.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm kind of leaning towards some kind of tech and innovation or something like that that's going on.
Well,
because there are major scientific institutions in big cities as well.
Yeah, I want to talk about your website real quick. It's johntitor.com. That's JOHNTITOR. And our listeners can go there to check that out, johntitor.com. Now, how many times do you update this a week?
It's very on and off, and I got to be honest with you, we haven't really made any updates for a couple of months, and then we'll see something in the news. Actually, what spurred me this time was seeing Michio Kaku on the news, basically laying out the entire fundamentals for what was going on at CERN, exactly the way John said. I go, this is crazy. I can't believe that he's backing up and saying all these things. So that's what motivates us to go update the site. We just put our own little, what you want to call, like a video, I don't know what you call it, like a webcast on there that you can go and listen to now. And it's like a half hour long, and I'm going to try to do more of those. So if people want to go to the site and check it out, be sure to look for that. But I'll try to update that more often. So.
Now, is that an update, or is that just kind of give the story, or what?
Yeah, that is basically like my take on what's happening in the news, and then I go back and talk about the posts. So it's sort of half and half. I talk about a history, and then how it's affecting us now. So I'm going to try to do those more often.
Okay, that sounds interesting enough. Does John ever talk about religion or anything like that in any of his postings?
Yeah, actually he does. He says he said that, most organized religions had gone by the wayside, and that religion was much more of a personal thing. But, he described himself as a Gnostic Christian. And he even went back, he talked about the Ten Commandments. One of the comments he made, he said that, I guess it was the third commandment, or one, keeping holy the Sabbath day is no longer Sunday, it's Saturday.
Huh.
And he talked about the new interpretation of some of the Ten Commandments. For example, I think, forgive me on this, but there's a commandment that talks about not having false idols. And according to John, they feel that God was talking about genetic engineering, that it was wrong to create images of humans, either in cloning or artificially, and that was the true meaning of that commandment. I remember him talking about that a couple of times.
That's really interesting. We had a caller on the line. Is it Ron? Okay. Ron, you're on the air. What's up?
Raleigh, North Carolina.
Hey, what's going on?
Not much, man. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. I guess I got some generalized questions because I've heard other scenarios. Mr. Williams, did you have? You said you got a scenario that involves an attack on the U.S. with high altitude detonations or EMP detonations of nuclear weapons?
Yeah. Now keep in mind, this is not me. This is what John said when he was posting. So you can go back and read what he said, if you need to. But as I recall, he was very specific, or he talked about, the nuclear weapons were small. They were not these huge, gigantic megaton weapons. They were small weapons, and they were designed not to cause a lot of radiation, which meant that if they formed a big crater and brought all that dirt up, that would end up in the atmosphere. So a lot of them were air bursts over the cities, he said.
I was a little more interested in the why. Did he have anything to say about why they were launching the attack?
Well, whatever led up to this, he said it was a world conflict, and it had to do with Western instability. I don't exactly know why. I'm not sure he talked about that. But he said it was not a surprise. He said over and over again, he says, when it comes, you're going to know it's coming. It's not going to happen by surprise, is what he said.
Well, there are various other scenarios. As for an example, I can recall reading, I was in upstate New York, a town called Watertown, and there was a book on prophecy in general, and it mentioned specifically a doctor during World War II recorded a dream that he had in which there was a launch from a submarine in the Arctic Circle against Russia and the U.S. simultaneously. And it ended up being a deception with a third party trying to initiate an exchange between Russia and the U.S., I guess because we have more nuclear weapons than anyone else. Does he talk anything about strategic deception, or is it just that he's experienced these things? I guess you're saying these are referenced through alleged time travel and the person is posting them on a website after communicating forward in time?
But, just based on the question, my interpretation of it is that it happened on a big scale. It wasn't one or two missiles and then more missiles. It was everybody was launching at the same time. And it was not a surprise. It was something that was obvious to anybody that was paying attention that was going to happen.
Right, but does this involve any other scenarios besides just a world crisis? If you go forward in time, you're going to have the ability to detect what this crisis is. Is it something geophysical? Does he believe it's part of the Revelation event sequence that's listed in the Bible, or is this just a war at large?
Yeah, he said that there was a lot of other conflict going on the planet. We were in the Civil War, but there was more conflict.
Okay,
and that it was not a surprise.
A civil war.
And that it happened everywhere. Also keep in mind, from the way John was describing this is that he's talking about his future. He said over and over again, we obviously and we absolutely have the power to stop this, but he had no faith in us that we would. So, I'm sure that we could change it if we wanted to, but he said we're probably not going to do that.
Interesting. That was Ron Paul Hunter. Excellent questions again
From Raleigh, North Carolina.
If you're
running
listening short on the line, so we have
if you're listening to us in Phoenix tonight, or if you're listening online, give us a call. Here we've got a few minutes left. 877-722-7382.
I want to ask this crazy question. Just came up in my head. And I only have almost no time to ask it. But what about the possibility that there is a Back to the Future scenario? and the fact that John Titor comes back here, says what he has to say. And, we're talking about alternate realities anyway, things that potentially could or could not happen. He talks about this stuff, and maybe the buzz about what's going on here, inadvertently causes his own personal timeline to transform as well in his reality. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's actually interesting that you bring that up because, the other level to this is that John talked about that in a little bit of detail, and he made reference to the fact that, there's a huge question is why is he telling us Y2K happened for him, but it didn't happen for us? And a lot of people believe that the reason Y2K didn't happen for us was because of something that John did in 1975. So we're already living on a timeline, if you will, that was altered by a time traveler in 1975. And according to John, the fact that Y2K did not happen for us was a bad thing. That all of these trials and tribulations and awful things that were in his future, ultimately, at the end of that, things were much better. The United States was better. Life was better. But we had to go through that to get there. And now that Y2K didn't happen, that wasn't going to happen for us. So a lot of people think that the reason John was here was either to fix that and get us back on track to go through all these awful things, or he was here for some other reason. And, if you look at the way the world is running now and where we are in the United States, I'm wondering if that's not such a non-far-fetched idea.
2012, man, 2012. Oliver, thank you so much for spending time with us tonight.
No problem, guys.
Would love to have you back on again.
All right, no problem. I'd love that, too.
Excellent.
That was
Thank you
Oliver
very much.
Williams. Thank you very much, sir. The website is johntitor.com. That's JOHNTITOR.com. There you can pick up your latest edition of the John Titor Times.
Excellent. So that's it for tonight, really.
Pretty much. But crazy things.
It's an excellent website. It's a very cool story. If you don't know about Oliver Williams and John Titor, you've got to check it out. It's amazing.
Yeah, there's much more to out there than we can really even cover in this brief interview. But definitely check it out and see what you think about it. Shoot us an email, worldoftheunexplained@gmail.com, worldoftheunexplained@gmail.com. Let us know your thoughts and comments are appreciated. You're listening to World of the Unexplained, and we're signing off tonight. This is Jay Scott, your only JDDJ on this network, I believe.
This is Trent Lackey in the distant future, the year 2000. Chuck.
Peace out from the future.